Welcome, Jeannie Ewing, to the Endow family. Hello, Endow ladies. I'm so happy to be speaking to Jeannie today about grief and loss and waiting and suffering and the cross and all these kind of things, which is especially pertinent for the season of Lent, and also what we all experienced in 2020, what we're continuing to experience now. And so, Jeannie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So happy to have you. Even though this topic is a difficult one, I think it's an important one, especially in the Christian life. And we've talked before, Jeannie, about how the prosperity gospel is a really attractive heresy. And I always get annoyed and triggered, especially on social media, when I see kind of quasi-Christian influencers just promising perfection in the world to everyone. And we know as Christians that God is the divine physician and healer, and there's a lot of unnecessary suffering that we don't need to suffer because of sin, or just because we haven't asked for healing or haven't done the work that healing takes. But there's also legitimate crosses and grief that is just part and parcel of the Christian life. And I remember one of my biggest influencers in life is actually a Jewish guy, Dennis Prager. And he one of the things that he says that always sticks in my mind, especially when I'm feeling very sorry for myself or whatever I happen to be suffering at the moment, is that life is difficult for everybody. And so I think I'd love to talk to you today about, well, just a little bit of your story, and also how you were called into this ministry of helping women kind of grieve their losses. And then we can kind of see where our conversation takes us. So welcome again. And
Thanks. You know what, your intro, there's so much to unpack. I would love to do that. I will introduce myself in a moment, but I wanted to just briefly mention what you were saying about sin and suffering. So what I like to write about is God has a perfect and a permissive will. And we also have to factor in, when we go through, what St. John of the Cross called the dark night of the soul, which I think is often loosely used in spiritual circles, but what it really entails is an understanding of what I call a holy darkness, and that excludes sin and unnecessary suffering. So you're absolutely right. I think that what a lot of Christians don't fully grasp, because it's a very mysterious dimension of their life, is that we have to work through a lot of garbage, and we have to get through a lot of really hard feelings, complicated experiences, and a lot of pain. That's really the journey of healing, and that's what it means to walk with the Lord. And oftentimes he will invite us to a place of holy darkness, which means we don't feel his presence, we don't hear his voice, we don't feel like he's moving in our lives, we feel like we're waiting and we have no idea why, we feel stuck, we don't have any consolations. And that's actually normal if you are a faithful person and the Lord is inviting you to a deeper faith. So I just wanted to preface that and kind of piggyback off of what you said in your intro, because that's a lot to unravel. So my background, I actually have a master's degree in counseling. I used to be a high school counselor. I ran a grief group for teenagers, but at the time I had no idea that God was going to call me to write about grief. And so my husband and I have been married 13 years. We have 5 children. Our oldest is 10 and our youngest is 9 months. So, well, actually, when our second daughter, Sarah, was born, she was born with a rare disease, and there are really no statistics about mortality rates or life expectancy, and a lot of people with her condition, which is called Apert syndrome, it's a craniofacial condition that requires dozens of surgeries throughout one's life. The fact that I couldn't have any concrete information on what we were going to go through with her, and I still don't, that plunged me into a place of darkness and a place of grief. And I didn't know what it was at the time. This was about six or 7 years ago. And it was just kind of a gentle and gradual revelation from God that he wanted me to write about grief. And I was like, I'm not qualified to do this. This is a big topic. But from grief to grace, was born, I guess you could say. That's my magnum opus about the topic of grief. And I like to say that, there's a lot of subtopics that go under the umbrella of grief. And I tend to touch on all of them. So more recently, because I suffered from infertility, miscarriage, and then superfertility, and then I had a hysterectomy, um, a lot of women have come to me with their stories about the same kinds of things and what it's like to feel the loss of not being able to have a child when you want to get pregnant, what it's like to lose a baby when you really long for that baby, what it's like to get pregnant when you're desperate to kind of recover and allow your body and your mind and your soul to heal. And even the loss of not being able to have children any longer because your fertility is gone. So like I said, there's a lot of layers to grief, and I like to talk about whatever the Holy Spirit leads me to talk about.
Wow, there's a lot there. I think something that you said about kind of the healing is a process, and so I think it takes a lot of work in our walk with Jesus to rooting out the unnecessary suffering, seeking healing, seeking miracles, seeking all this kind of stuff, going through that, rooting out sin so we don't suffer that way, and then really being, when we do go through those dark nights, and I agree with you, I think sometimes that term's thrown out by a lot of people, and I don't know if they understand what it means. Sometimes I don't know if I understand what it means, but that is something that is, I was actually thinking about this recently, how there's like you could choose like two ways of like discomfort in life. The discomfort of too much comfort, which I think is easier for those who are wealthy, and in America, if you're in America listening. But then there's the Christian discomfort of like being on the path and being in that dynamic relationship where you are either in a period of waiting, or you're in the intensity of healing, or you're just recovered for healing, a little emotional break, and then something else, and I think I kind of fell into that. I never felt attracted to the prosperity gospel. But I think I did kind of fall into that. Well, I've done all my work, and so now I'm healed, and now we're good. Good thing I did all that. Feel so bad for others who don't know about this gospel, and then it was like, oh wait, I'm getting re-traumatized, and like life is kind of traumatic, and you can't predict what's going to happen, and you have to confront it again, and all with the faith that in fact God does intend to bring great good out of whatever he permits to happen. And it's for his glory and for my abundant life, my happy life, which I think is the other missing piece, because we can get kind of dreary and not joyful as we're talking about this stuff. So just keeping that perspective in mind. But I guess I think there's so many things I could ask you about, and we might have to have you back on. But I think last year was so hard with COVID, and there's still things that we're dealing with now, but definitely 2020 is like the marker year, right? And apart even from COVID, I think there were just all these other kind of random losses in my friends in my network that I thought was like particularly cruel for what felt like already an especially difficult year. But then when you think about all the sufferings and other people's sufferings that are much, much worse, then it just feels like I'm playing the narcissistic game of like, oh, life's hard now for all of us, when like life is really hard for a lot of people all the time, 2020 or not. But I had some friends who lost, young people in their life. A woman who lost her son at 21, a friend of mine who lost her granddaughter at 17. How do you accompany people with that kind of loss?
That's a big question. Accompaniment has to begin with self-awareness. So if I am called to journey with another person who is experiencing devastating and profound loss, like the ones you mentioned, I have to be a spiritually and emotionally mature person myself. So, gosh, it's a lot of what you're saying about weeding through my own narcissism, my egotism. It's about weeding out the comforts of privilege and prosperity. It's about understanding the narrative that has played itself out from the dysfunction that maybe I grew up with, or that I adopted from my own brokenness, my own wounds, my relationships with others that were riddled with betrayal or something like that, rejection, loneliness. So you really have to work hard on yourself all the time. And I don't think there's ever like a perfect place for a person to be when they accompany another person through loss. But what I have found is that most people are so profoundly uncomfortable with suffering and grief that it's almost like when they learn of someone else who has lost someone that seems cruel, like what you talked about with young people, they turn to these trite and really hurtful and painful platitudes because they don't want to confront the trigger of their own suffering and their own grief that's not yet resolved. And I don't know if that makes sense to you, but this
Yeah.
is what I'm talking about continually on a daily basis, I believe, bringing these things to the Lord and bringing them to the sacraments and bringing them to prayer, because that is how we allow God to kind of peel away at our own layers of wounds and woundedness. And in turn, we can be kind of like what Henry Nouwen calls the wounded healer.
I love
So
that.
no healer is perfect except for the divine physician, Jesus, right?
Right.
And we have a close second with the Blessed Mother as the most powerful intercessor on our behalf, especially as women, I think, too.
Yep.
But when it comes to us being the hands, feet, face, and voice of Jesus, we have to accept the fact that we are going to be the wounded healers. And that's good. That's okay. Because I think that it becomes a more powerful testament to
Mhm.
people who are suffering when they know that we have been there in some way. And that's not to say that I go up to someone who's lost their child, from leukemia at the age of 5, and I say, "Oh, I understand how you feel," because
Yeah.
I don't. I
Yeah.
don't know what that's like. But it's to say that we can enter into that journey with them in some way, whether it's a small way or a big way. So if I'm the one who's with that person in the moment, it means that I can be humble and honest with the admission that I don't know what this is like for you, but I understand if you're angry and I understand if you're confused. And that's okay to be in that place. And I just want you to know that I'm here with you. So there are things that I think each of us can maybe be receptive to whatever the Holy Spirit is asking, because it differs from relationship to the relationship. So for instance, in my situation, I might be heavily called to accompany someone with a lot of their details, maybe visiting them in the home if they're sick, maybe calling them to follow up with them, maybe sending care packages, meals, things like that. Or there might be another relationship I have where I'm supposed to be more on the periphery and maybe doing more prayer support, an occasional check-in. And that's really where it comes down to the nuances of how open and receptive are we to the Holy Spirit and his promptings and his movements within us and in our relationships.
I love that, because I think that brings in the unique personal vocation of every person, and also the charisms. Like if you are someone who is gifted with the charism of hospitality or service, like you're going to be the one that's like bringing the dinners and doing all that. Or if you have an intercessory prayer charism praying. So I really love that. Well, one, it's a call to like maturity and self-awareness, and two, to look at in what way, in my own way, how am I called to accompany this person that makes sense for all these circumstances. So I really, really appreciate that. And yeah, the trite, like cliche things, it's horrifying in general, but when Christians do it, extra horrifying, especially because we have such like a deep theology that we don't need to say weird things to people to make it okay for ourselves, ultimately, is what I think is going on there. But beautiful. And I also love that you touched on this like addiction to good feelings that we have because of our own kind of lack of maturity and wanting to go to the depths of whatever it is that we're experiencing. Just beautiful. I talked to a woman the other day who is middle-aged, single, and is grieving the loss of the fact that she had always dreamed about marriage and children, and that didn't happen. And just wondering what God has for her there. And so we had a nice conversation about it, but I'm curious because grief and waiting and all that is one of the many things that you talk about. How would you approach that question? Or and some a comment that she made, and it is hard for me to hear when people say things like the church has programs for this person, not that person, because it seems like, well, everybody seems lonely to me. Married, single, young, old, everybody just seems to be in this, like, more than just a COVID loneliness, just like there's an epidemic of loneliness. And so, I don't want to dismiss the fact that what she's saying, has truth in it, but also the fact that I don't think it's just limited to people in her situation or state in life. So thoughts on that?
I think what you're speaking about is this existential loneliness. It's a universal experience. And I have personally found that when I feel the chasm of this ache for longing to belong, or longing for community, or longing for love and unity and communion, it's really, again, the Lord is pursuing me, and he wants me to pursue him. And by doing that, the only way sometimes that the Lord can reach us is by stripping us of all the things that distract us or numb us or lead us away from that pining only for him. And I think that's why I really have always loved the book, The Song of Songs, because it really is like a love poem between the Lord and his beloved. And we are his beloved. And sometimes, when we go through life and we have an expectation of how our life should go, which I have been in that place. So I'm speaking to the woman about whom you're mentioning. I think that maybe God wants us to shed our expectations. And sometimes that means that the void that we think will be filled or fulfilled through the vocation of marriage and family, which is beautiful. It's a gift. I mean, I'm married. I have 5 children. Sometimes God is asking us to turn that longing or that pining into a prayer and into an emptiness so that he can fill it with whatever gift he wants to give us. And that can happen in midlife. I'm actually middle age. I'm 40. So I was talking to my spiritual director, who is also in a very similar trajectory to this woman you're talking about. So my spiritual director is actually she's older than middle aged, but she's single. She's never been married, doesn't have a family. And so she has spoken often to me about, as we transition in our life from youth to middle age to older age, how actually each phase of our life, the Lord presents a new apprenticeship, a new opportunity to, I guess, be open to whatever work he has planned for us. So I think what it has to do with is we have to accept the existential loneliness. It's not going to be fulfilled in this life. It will not. We look at every life of every saint and they all experienced it. And that's not to say, like you had mentioned in the opening segment, about we have to remember and keep in mind that joy and hope is on the horizon. And absolutely, as Christians, that's what we have. If we didn't have that, then we would be like the Buddhists, everything would be annihilated, and a lot of other polytheistic religions.
We have it now amidst the suffering.
We do, but that's another kind of layer to grief. And I don't think a lot of people, so you were even talking about, oh, well, hearing Christians even say these platitudes like everything happens for a reason and they're in a better place and it's God's will. What's that?
It's the worst offender, is everything happens for a reason. It's the worst.
But see, that's the thing, is I have met people who are maybe daily mass goers, pray the rosary every day. They are what they would consider deeply devout, what in the past I would have considered to be deeply devout.
I love how you phrase that, what they would consider deeply. I'm going to and steal that.
Yeah, because that's the thing, is a lot of people who are very driven by law tend to emulate the Pharisees. They're Pharisaical. So they're more like, well, I'm doing all the things that make me holy. But maybe the thing is the hard thing, which is actually allowing God to enter the really ugly, messy, dark, broken, wounded, weak places in us
Yeah.
that we don't want to admit are there, that
Yeah.
make us feel frightened, make us feel shocked.
Yeah.
I felt that way when I had my daughter, Sarah. I would look at her and I would be disgusted, and I hated myself for it because I had to admit, oh my gosh, my daughter, her face looks scary. And I hate the fact that I'm her mom and I'm thinking that. But the thing is, I use that as an example because I don't think that we can ever get to a place of accepting our existential loneliness and allowing the Lord to transform it by stripping us of our pretenses and our expectations. We can't do that until we first admit the ugly stuff about us.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh, you just said so many things I want to comment on. So this is hard to choose, but I absolutely affirm that. And I think at some point, the healing can start to happen when we get real with ourselves, which I think is one of the things that you're saying that is so crucial. And it's easy to hide behind churchy stuff. It's really easy, and it feels correct. And so again, this isn't, daily mass goers and whatnot, but I remember having that little conversion moment where I was going to mass every day and patting myself on the back about it and going, wait, you're here because you're a beggar and you're messed up, not because you're doing God or anyone any favors. And that was like a real grace filled moment, because it's really easy to fall into that when the externals seem to be in order. But something that you were saying about the opportunity, the ache, the loneliness, to be an opportunity to dialogue with the mystery, to dialogue with God, and to say, like, what is it that you are calling me to here and next? And maybe, as in your case, with your daughter, it was the good that God brought out of it is this whole ministry that you're doing. And just to clarify, God did not allow that to happen to bring good out of it. That's just the good that he brought out of it. Right. So,
well, again, I think it goes back to the difference between permissive and perfect will.
exactly.
So, of course, God's perfect will would be everything that he had envisioned before the fall of Adam and Eve, right?
Exactly.
Perfection in our health and in our,
everything.
okay. But he did permit Sarah to be born with this condition. And there is a profound mystery in that. But there's also this twinge of beauty. And it's so weird because I feel like ever since we've had Sarah, my life has been full of contradictions. Like you were saying, experiencing the joy and the hope in the midst of profound pain and suffering, and seeing the beauty in the midst of what the world would consider ugly. I mean, it's just like everything about my life is like that. So
yeah. Exactly the paradox of the Christian life. But I was thinking about, when you were talking about that opportunity, I was thinking about Dorothy Day. I'm not a Dorothy Day expert, but the fact that she has this like conversion to the church and then is like really disappointed with the fact that like communists are taking better care of the poor than Catholics. And then, well, isn't that going into uncomfortable, messy places? And being, I think she has this great line about like one must be in constant dissatisfaction with the church. And what I think she means by that is that we can't get to this point of patting ourselves on the back with self-satisfaction, but always have to be refreshing ourselves and being in the healing process so that we can go out and be part of that work of restoration. And so perhaps with this woman and other people who might be listening who relate to this, there is in that ache an opportunity to look at the ache of others and to see where I can respond to this. And if I'm going through, and to be honest with you, this is why I started so many communities, not because I was like on this like activist Catholic project, but I literally would move to a new town and was lonely and was like, well, I guess I'm going to start a group because it was not this like big pious thing. It was literally like, I need friends. So this is what's going to happen for me. This is what I need to do. And, sometimes it was just so weird and awkward and uncomfortable and like, it just didn't work and whatever. But eventually, like, God did bless that for me and brought me friends wherever I've lived. But there was always that period of like awkwardness, discomfort, suffering, questioning, mystery, like abandonment, betrayal, all the range of like emotions there. But anyway, so, well, what else should we talk? I mean, there's, again, we can keep talking about that, or just, I guess for Lent, maybe as we head towards wrapping up, you can tell us maybe just some things we can meditate on with, or just encouraging, maybe for those listening who are like, I keep pushing that away and kind of slapping on the Christian bumper stickers or the cliches, and I'm all too satisfied with them, or I don't know. I want to hear. I've been enjoying hearing you so much wisdom from what you're saying.
Well, you have a lot of depth too. It's really nice to talk to someone who shares that, because there are other people who have a ministry with speaking or media or something, and sometimes the conversations kind of remain superficial. So it's been nice to do this too. And I guess the way I could kind of circle it back or wrap it up in what you're saying is that kind of circles back to the accompaniment piece when you're saying using Dorothy Day's work and her example, and how we have to have this dissatisfaction with the church. I think that that's what it means to be a follower of Christ, is that we have to recognize the dissatisfaction and restlessness in ourselves, but then also use that in a way that is healing to others and productive in whatever way God's calling us to. And often it's going to be, like you're saying, uncomfortable and awkward and lonely and messy. And that's okay. That's the work of Christ. That's what he did. And so we have to be, I think, willing to do that. We have to be willing to wake up. So, with Lent, if we want to kind of also tie it back into what we're talking about, being churchy or kind of being the Pharisaical Christian, so to speak, a lot of people, a lot of Catholics especially, during Lent, they have this very specific regimented way that they want to experience Lent. They enter into Lent and they're so confident. They're like, it's almost like a New Year's resolution, right? It's like, oh, well, I'm going to give this up, and and that makes them feel like pious, because it's hard for them to go without coffee in the morning, which it might genuinely be hard. But I'm just saying they're choosing a sacrifice, or they're choosing a penance or a mortification. And what happens is they're missing the whole point of Lent, because I think that what the Lord is asking us to do is allow him to pick the Lent for us. And this goes back to something I read from St. Alphonsus Liguori, and I'm going to very awkwardly, loosely paraphrase what he said. But he wrote in some devotional that I had been reading a year or two ago that it's easier for us to pick our own crosses, so that we can tie that into Lent, our mortifications and penances, but they're not as efficacious as the crosses that God picks for us.
Oh, man.
And we actually don't have to look for suffering in our life. We really don't have to do it. And I think a lot of like super pious Christians, they think that they are supposed to do that. Like they're supposed to be martyrs of the faith in a mystical way. Like, oh, well, I'm being such a good Christian because I'm suffering so much. And it's really like this twisted, disordered
false humility.
Yeah, it's a false humility. It's something that they chose. And instead of like I'm talking about, this total annihilation of self, this self-emptying, and this allowing God to lead us to our own passion, to our own cross, that is much harder, but it's much more purifying and sanctifying in the long run.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I just love what you said, because and I find it so hard to, because there are people in my life that are of this sort that, love to let me know about all the sacrifices they're making for the Lord. and I just, what can I say right now? I just want to say, sit with the Lord, feel his love, talk to him like a child, and let that be the beginning of what your sacrifice or penance or should be. You just topple thing after thing after thing after thing after thing. And what for? The best thing, Jeannie, you'll love this. I think you'll love it. You can tell. You'll obviously tell me if you don't. But I went to a Lent retreat last year, and the priest speaking said, your willpower, good luck with that. The best way you can use your will is to cling to Jesus, because he can change everything for you. For me, that was the best thing I could have heard during Lent, because there is such that temptation to self-reliance. So much of that temptation to be like, I'm going to do this, 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 I'm going to feel great about it, and blah, 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 blah. And he said that, and that set me free. I want to love Jesus and cling to him. And like you said, he'll let me know what opened my blind eyes to the circumstances in my life where I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing here. I'll go ahead and cooperate with that. Instead of these ideologies of where I can stack and pin things and control, which is completely the point. The point is we want to get close to Jesus and follow his direction, not let him know how awesome we are. So anyway, I love that.
So, I mean, that's like really what it means to grow in the virtue of poverty.
It is. It's the first beatitude. It's the first beatitude. Poverty of spirit. It is. God, I'm empty. And Ratzinger says this in his book, What It Means to Be a Christian, which was my Advent read, was, why is faith necessary if we can say that like love is enough, like love is everything? Why is faith necessary? Because faith is that recognition that I don't love perfectly, that no matter how hard I try. And so faith is saying, okay, Lord, come on in. Like, I need you. I can't be as morally coherent as I wish to be. And so here you are. And so he says, wherever there is true loving, faith is already present.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way to end, don't you?
Yes. Thank you, Jeannie. This was such a gift to talk to you. So refreshing.
Likewise.
And hopefully we talk again soon.
Yeah, absolutely.